another case which compares Matsushita, known as Panasonic nowadays, against Philips, and also in terms of their so both cases deal with the tension between centralization and decentralization, as well as the issues that we will encounter when we try to move from one end to the other. So they are highly related. But anyway, let's start with SONY's operation in Europe. So in this case, you will see at least three organizational charts. One organization chart about their situation in the 70s. The second one is about their organizational structure in the 80s. And finally, there is some description about what they were trying to implement, the new structure they tried to implement in the 90s. So we will focus more on the shift from 80s to 90s. But as a start, it's helpful to to understand the historical background. So this was what the structure was like back in the 1970s. So the same figure that you have on in your case. Okay, so you can see there are three major organizational units over here. This is their headquarters back here in Tokyo, and this is their company, sales company in different countries in the Europe. And there is some kind of SONY overseas, SA, or so on and so forth. Okay, so the first thing I want you to get at is, what do you see from this chart? What does this figure tell you? How did the organization work back in the 70s? Yes, please.
All the European companies had to, I guess, go and, I guess they were subservient to the Tokyo Corporation.
Okay, so basically they have direct interaction with the headquarters in the US, without like intermediary in between. So what are these line of meetings? What kind of things you talk about in line meeting? Okay, so as the head of a particular European sales company, you are in direct interaction with those guys in Europe through this kind of line of meeting. So what kind of issue do you discuss in this line of meetings? Yes, please.
What kind of products you want for your specific country?
Okay.
What kind of pricing policies you make for the countries?
Okay. So basically your product portfolio as well as pricing. Okay. Now the situation back there is, as you can imagine, back in the 70s, the US had this Japanese just produced the products that they consider fit. And then if you are operating the European operation, what you will do is to looking at this catalog of products and think about among these available products that were developed and produced under the control of these Japanese guys, what will be a sale in your company? Okay, so you decide on your product scope. And then if you decide this is some of the product that you want, you also have to negotiate with them about the proper pricing. Okay, so that's how things work back in the 70s. Okay, so they have another subsidiary here that provide tax and legal issues, so kind of support to these European companies. What else? What else do we see here? Yes, please.
There are a lot of European sales companies there.
Okay, so pretty much a decentralized structure. Often are connected directly to the headquarters through these line-up meetings. Other note, any things that you consider significant? Yes, please.
These European sales companies are autonomous in structure.
Okay.
Independent of each other.
Okay.
And they are controlled directly by the SONY Tokyo.
Okay, so they are relatively independent, right? So it's not like these Japanese in Tokyo were controlling them. It's more like they work more like as a partner, right? So in each country, the so-called subsidiary were independent, okay, not under centralized control. Now, in fact, the case also told you that many of these companies started as they were like entrepreneurs who find an opportunity to sell Japanese products, so they start a business with that. And after working with SONY for a while, and Sony was like, would you be willing sell like 50% of your stock to me, I can offer attractive price, like that. So these companies, some of them used to be independent company to begin with, right? Or like sales companies, and not even after selling a significant shares to this Japanese to Sony, they still maintain a high degree of independence. Okay, so far we have seen, so this is a decentralized model with weak centralized control. And these are sales companies, meaning that they're not in charge of like production or something else. They basically pick the products that are offered in Japan, okay, and try to figure out a feasible pricing strategy that is considered acceptable by the Japanese headquarters. Okay, here, and the case also told you that during this period, things like production activities and logistics, despite these activities were carried out in Europe, they were still under strict control of the Japanese headquarters. Okay, so that was the situation in the 70s. Okay. Moving to the 80s, what kind of changes are there in comparison to this? Pretty much the same, or you see some kind of differences? Yes, please.
Several European divisions, they report to SONY Europa.
Okay.
But they still are like under the Japanese SONY.
Okay.
But now they at least have somebody close to them in Europe.
Okay. Okay, so they establish this European headquarters. Okay, and for some activities, the European subsidiary can gain support from this big entity which is closer to them. You don't have to rely on direct communication with people who are so very far away in Tokyo. Okay, but they still maintain this line of meeting. So you have some guy nearby, but when it's come to, for example, the selection of product and process, you still talk directly to the Japanese headquarters. What else? Yes.
They established committees to make some pan-European decisions, I guess.
Okay.
And then they mentioned something about becoming a global company, but with a lot of local traits, local features.
Okay.
So some R&D and product development decisions made globally, but with productions in local European countries.
Okay. Okay. So as you can see, in the previous structure, there was like no horizontal coordination between different European countries. Okay, so here they try to establish committee when there are issues that involve more than two European companies, or multiple European subsidiaries, then this is the mechanism for them to talk to one another. Yes, please.
So maybe from the picture, in the Sony Tokyo organization structure became more product based. For example, say there was a division for audio, there was a division for mobile electronic, and etc. But earlier, entire thing was controlled by a single centralized administration.
Okay. So one thing that also happened is like the establishment of distinct business group in the Japanese part. Okay, so you can imagine the implication. So previously, in this kind of conversation, in comparison to the conversation you have to do here, because you're probably selling products across different business divisions. So there are going to be multiple contact points in the European headquarters under this new structure. And chances are the head of this business group will see each other as competitors in career advancement. There can be some kind of tension that will affect your communication with them. Okay, so that's the 80s. So why do they have to change this? What kind of problems or situation do they try to address? Right, if this problem, this structure works just fine, there's probably little motivation for you to change, but certainly they're encountering some situation that require changes. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think they said that they were like the European market was getting saturated at the end of the 80s. Like,
Okay.
TV sales were not selling as well, I guess.
Okay.
And so their margins were getting somewhere.
Okay, so the market is becoming more mature. what usually come along with this, the maturity of product market? Yes, please.
Lower margins.
Lower margins.
Yeah. More competition.
Okay, so competition, the level of competition rises, as a result, the margin tend to drop. Okay, so you will be faced with stronger cost pressure. Yes, please.
So European companies no longer have to fly to Tokyo so often to negotiate with Tokyo management people. So it was much better to make a committee to negotiate with the full European companies.
Okay, so we're thinking in terms of negotiation power. So when you negotiate with these guys in Tokyo office, if you represent just your country, so your power tends to be lower. But if you can consolidate the need across the Europe, all the European subsidiary, and send a unified face to negotiate with Tokyo, they have to pay them, more seriously. Any others kind of situation they try to address? Like competitions, this is like external issue, and or the negotiation power, this is more like internal issue. What else?
They were trying to reduce inventory and sales and general administration costs.
Okay. This is associated with the fact that because the competition is rising, so you're facing with stronger cost pressure. In the decentralized mode operation, you tend to have duplicated activities. Okay, so if you can centralize some of these activities, you may be able to reduce the cost. In particular, with regard to like production and logistics. Any other things they try to address? Yes.
Maybe in production.
Okay.
That when the market is mature, then they want to have a production in Europe rather than in Japan.
Okay.
So that maybe they can avoid some tax and legal issues that they have previously.
Okay. By this point, they already had productions in Europe. The thing is that even until this stage, the production activity are under tight control of the Japanese. Okay, so these European companies were not involved in production. Yes, please.
I might have misunderstood, but there was like the Nordic countries have been kind of more unified, and they saw that as like a good, strong way of, I guess, cutting extra costs and duplicated functions between the countries. So they wanted lots of consolidation.
Okay, so in addition to the North European part, they also want to like push for more better consolidation across other parts in Europe. Yes.
They try to promote some healthy competition within the region among the countries.
Okay.
I guess by establishing some uniform ways of measurement,
Okay.
they can promote that sort of healthy competition among themselves.
Competition among themselves, you mean comparing the performance
Compare the
across
performance
different
across
countries?
different countries within Europe. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes, please.
So apart from the market situation in Europe, there was a global recession.
Right.
Because of which it was very difficult for the SONY Tokyo to coordinate between all those European sales companies.
Right.
So it was important for them to compete in the market in such a way that the products are unique in that market in each of these countries.
Right.
And hence they needed one committee to coordinate all these companies in Europe.
Okay.
Otherwise they need to change the structure.
Okay. So not just the European consideration, but also the global the global competition landscape has been changing. Okay, so this is just some of the things that we have already been discussed. So in the structure in the 80s, what did these country managers do? So basically involved in the marketing and sales activity, and also have to handle inventory because they got this output from headquarters, and some of those were produced in production facility in Europe, but under the control of the Japanese headquarters. Okay, so basically marketing, promotion, and sale, or marketing and sale plus inventory. Okay, so they negotiate with Japan directly for product selection and pricing. Okay, so they are independent and profit and loss with independent profit and loss responsibility. In fact, they used to be many of them used to be entrepreneurs running their own independent business. Okay, So what did global headquarters in Japan do? So they maintain tight control of plants, including those plants in Europe. So they were producing in Europe, but under the control of the Japanese headquarters. Okay? And then they have different product group being in charge of different line of businesses. Okay. So what did this newly established SONY Europe basically did? They provide general support to all the European subsidiaries, such as, for example, the management information system. Okay? And the thing is that you can imagine the situation. They produce in Europe, but the production activity were handled by Japanese very far away. The Japanese headquarters very far away. And there is local demands, conditions in different European countries. Okay? They are closer to Europe. So they play as a middleman when it comes to align the production activities with the country level sales. They are supposed to understand the demand condition in different European countries. And based on that knowledge, they communicate with the Japanese headquarters about how to fine-tune their production activity in Japan. Okay, so they basically did that on behalf of the local country subsidiary. They also sponsor pan-European committee, so this one. Okay, so representatives from different countries subsidiaries are supposed to come here and meet on a regular or as well as irregular basis so that they can exchange information and common concern and explore opportunities for cooperation if there are potential conflicts, then it's probably a platform for them to resolve their tension. So something like this. So this was pretty much the old structure. Okay. Now what has happened? As already discussed, the situation, the environment, the competition has been changing. Okay? One thing is that the market become mature because the product become mature, right? The product technology has become mature. So the room for innovation and differentiation have been decreased. Beforehand, before this, you were able to claim that your products are so unique in comparison to competitors. But by this stage, the differentiation has become very limited, right? If you look at television or refrigerators nowadays, it doesn't really make much difference. The different brands don't really make that difference. But they encounter this situation similar to a lesser extent already back in the 80s, back in the 90s, sorry. Okay, so lower degree of differentiation, you have Me Too products, and because of the availability of Me Too products and the general availability of related product technology, you can imagine the entry barrier will be reduced, and you can see more newcomers into the market landscape. So beforehand, the market was characterized by two-digit growth, but now it's in some European countries, the overall demand for consumer products has actually been declined. And also in the old days, because there are room for differentiation, so consumers in different countries actually prefer different things. But up to this stage, they pretty much like the same thing. Okay, so there is a convergence across Europe. Okay, now, because many of the production capacity were built during the time of growth. Okay, now the market became mature and some markets actually are declining. It's going to create excess capacity problem. Okay, and some companies also relocate their production site from high cost location to low cost location as well. Okay, so as mentioned, when you have maturity in some technologies, it's easy to get the technology that you want. This attract new entrants, or at least enable new entries. Okay? In the past old days, in different places in the world, you have relatively smaller and independent retailers. But now you have retailers spanning across different European countries. Okay, so you are dealing with the integrated channels. Okay, now product brands, you now have private label at a lower price producer. So these were the private labels associated with this larger and multinational distributor. So we see this quite often nowadays. So these were the situations that I have to deal with. So basically, these are external issues they have to deal with. Changing competition, changing technology, changing demand, even the changing distribution channel. Okay. So that's why they have to change. Now, if you look at this, again, to deal with the problems or the changes that you had just described, what kind of changes have to be made to this structure? What are the key things that you have to do with your organizational chart to deal with the changes that you just saw? Yes, please.
I would say put the lineup meetings with SONY Europa, the Japan European country management,
Okay.
instead of Japan. And then maybe just have like, I don't know, yearly meetings between SONY Europa and Japan. So
Okay.
that Japan still has an idea of what's going on,
Okay.
but then Europe has solely responsibility for its business.
Okay, so you're saying that for most of the issue being discussed in line meeting, you put the SONY Europe headquarters in charge. Okay, so that
For
the
Europe.
European
For
guys negotiate for the product portfolio for all the subsidiary. Okay, so line meeting will move here. Okay, but nonetheless, you would like to keep a direct connection between the headquarters and the each individual countries. Okay, so you keep this line, but like weaken it in a certain way. So maybe annual meeting or quarterly meeting or something like that.
Because Europe has more understanding of preferences of
Right.
its own market. So Japan shouldn't be telling which products to sell to people
Okay.
if they don't really know what's going on there.
Okay. So you want to maintain a certain degree of direct context. Any other suggestion? What do we have to do?
You need to strengthen the horizontal linkage between the different country management to deal with
Okay.
the European problem. So
Okay.
that they don't end up competing against each other for the same business.
Okay, so probably the committee, the function of this committee has to be strengthened. Okay, so the integration can be achieved by authority. So we talked about that already, right? When it comes to integration, coordination across different horizontal units, you can achieve that by procedures, that's the first thing, or by authority, so by the European kind of European headquarters, or by committee where they just interact with one another on a regular basis. Okay, so basically you're saying that we should strengthen this part and strengthen this part, whereas on the other hand you want to weaken this linkage, direct linkages to the Japanese headquarters. Any further suggestions? Yes, please.
Yes, I think we need to, lessen the independence of the European country management of
Okay.
individual countries.
Okay.
It comes along with strengthening SONY Europa and also the committees, but they're
Okay.
used to being independent organizations. But
Right.
we need to lessen their independence.
Okay. Right. So as a result, you're basically moving some of the powers away from these country managers who used to be independent entrepreneurs. They like to have to be in charge, but you're removing their decision-making power. All right, so this is what the new structure looks like. Okay, so they implement this. So the case had told you a more complicated story. So the CEO of their European headquarters had this idea that we need to push for better centralization, and he recruited a COO to come up with this kind of design and then communicate the new organizational structure through some kind of email, not email, but some kind of mails. Okay, so this was what the new structure looked like. Now, so as you can see, the country managers are here, right? And I mean, support function is nothing new, right? And this part is basically the European headquarters, okay? So there are two new organizational units. One is called regional sales. Right? They divide Europe into 4 regions. So basically North, Central, South, and East, okay? And consumer marketing Europe. So so basically 2 integrators under the European headquarters. Okay? Okay, so what do we see here? Can we elaborate? Can we discuss more about how this structure is supposed to work in accordance to the plan? How it actually works is another problem. It's another issue. But ideally, how is this supposed to work? Yes, please.
This is covered by both geography and also divisions.
Right.
So it used to be like just in Europe region,
Okay.
or just geographic difference. So
Okay.
we started to have both geography and department and can communicate more
Okay.
often
Okay.
inside of Europe.
Okay. Okay. So you can see, as mentioned, these are two integrators, right? So this is integrator for regional sales, for sale activities, okay? And consumer marketing, so this is about product management as well as marketing activities, okay? So in a way, they centralize the sales activities by larger regions, and they consolidate and centralize marketing activities by different lines of business, okay? And this also, the organization structure here is in line with the Japanese organizational structure. Remember back in the Japanese headquarters, the basic, the basis of divisionalization is based on different lines of business. Okay, they're sort of doing the same thing here in the European headquarters. Okay. Now, one question to think about is this. So if we reflect on what we have talked about before, right? In the old structure up until 80s, the country managers were responsible for marketing and sales and local inventories, right? Under the new structure, the marketing functions were integrated by lines of business and handled by this European headquarters, right? The sales activities were also integrated and handled by the European headquarters. So what do these guys do under this new structure? Right, you used to be in charge of marketing and sales and little local inventory control. You need that for the sales and marketing purpose, right? But now, what is that for you to do?
Isn't it like administration?
Administration, maybe local administration, okay? Maybe local hires, I don't know.
Yeah, like HR, administration.
Okay,
Finance.
right. Dealing with account receivable or something, make sure that you have money to pay. Okay, so you can quickly imagine a kind of tension, internal tension as a result of that. The country managers used to be in charge of their own independent kingdom. Okay, many of them started as an entrepreneur, right? And this is their territory. Now, new structure imply that they basically are left with very trivial things to do. Okay, most of the decision-making power will be taken away and placed in the hands of so-called European headquarters. Okay, so that is the issue that they have to deal with. Okay, for the first thing. Okay. We'll deal with that later. But that's further reflect on this organizational chart. Okay, setting aside the political issue that you have to remove power from people who have been like their own king, the king of their own kingdom for such a long time. Well, so what else do we see with this organization chart? Yes, please.
I think consumer marketing Europe used to be just a TV sales guy, but now they're everything sales guy.
Right.
They sell video, audio, mobile, all those sort of things. So they
Right.
became way bigger and more important.
Okay, okay. Right. So you have to bear in mind the level of responsibility. So this brings up another issue. For you to establish this kind of new integrating units, you need somebody to head this organization. Where are you going to find these people? Right? Remember? So before in the old structure, right? The country managers know about sales and marketing in their own country, but have limited exposure to other European countries. Okay? For the candidate to lead, for example, this particular unit, you need people who are familiar with the TV markets in, say, 20 different European companies. Where are you going to find these people? Yes, please.
It looked like they should have abolished the country managers and redeployed them
Okay.
to the other two divisions, I guess. Because
Okay.
as we mentioned, they're kind of powerless now.
Right.
And I envisioned it when I was reading it very different from this, because I thought the country managers would fall under the regional sales regions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like they would be grouped into, for example, North, Central, South, and East, rather than being their own division on the side.
Okay.
I thought it would be actually underneath, yeah.
In a way, because they're also dealing with things other than sales. So you cannot just put them under the sales division. So they also deal with, in accordance to the plan, right? Finance, accounting, HR, public relationship, general administrations. Okay, they are not just sales like units. So you cannot just put it under the European sales headquarters or sales units. Anyway, but in accordance to the plan, so the responsibility about promotion, channel, and services, these are sales-related activity fall under the regional sales unit in European headquarters. But they are supposed to form some kind of metric relationship with the country managers. Okay? When it's so-called metric structure, the next question we have to ask is, so you have like two lines. For example, the promotion activities in, I don't know, German is supposed to be under the direction of regional sales of the European headquarters, but at the same time, the German subsidiary should have a say about promotion in German. Okay, so you have like two lines of command. The question is who control what. Okay, so that's why this is important, right? This is how they divide the decision making. So look at this. You have CEO and COO, and this is not important, not that important. But then the key actors are here. So European headquarters, under which you have CME, so the marketing units. Okay, and then the sales, the regional sales, this unit. Okay, and finally the country managers. Okay, so look at who are deciding upon what. So look at pricing, for example, transfer price, deals, and so on and so forth. The final retail price. So most of the pricing is determined by the centralized marketing units controlling the whole Europe. But the country manager has the right to adjust the pricing a bit to reflect local competitive conditions as well as local purchasing power. Okay? So most decisions are made by CME, but the country manager can make a limited degree of adjustment. Okay? Procurement is dealt with by centrally. Inventory control is now managed centrally, but they still play a secondary role. I mean, the country manager still play a secondary role. Okay? Profit and losses, this is a bit there. And the important thing is that if you look at this, all of them are profit and loss centers. So they all have their bottom line to take care of. Okay? Of course, their scope of responsibility will be defined differently. Okay? Advertisement, promotion, they are like advertisement and promotion across the Europe and local promotion activities. When the promotion kind of activities involve multiple European companies, they will be handled by the CME. Otherwise, the country manager will deal with these activities. Okay, and then budget approval. This is where the powers. I mean, those who approve the budget have power, as we know. Okay, so this is clear indicator that the country manager stripped off their decision-making power. Okay, negotiation with Tokyo. Now, as suggested by you, the CME is supposed to do that, and the country manager no longer negotiate with the Tokyo headquarters directly. Okay, European accounts or account management. Okay, it's now handled by the sales region, support functions, finance, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is the allocation of decision-making rights. So when you look at this, this is basically a metric. You have to think about who is responsible in what areas. Okay, So that's what this new structure is like. Any further feedback? What do you think? Does this make sense to you? I mean, keeping in mind the issue that we try to deal with, right? If these plans actually work, does this make sense? Yes, please.
I have a question.
Okay.
Would you go to the table?
This one?
Why negotiation with Tokyo is under CME, not European headquarters?
Okay, European headquarters is the boss of CME,
Yeah.
right? So, because if you think about what they discussed about in line meeting, the product selections and pricing, these are marketing issues, okay? So you have your marketing head dealing with that negotiation, whereas you are like overseeing like everything.
It's just I thought that it would be European headquarters that can talk to Tokyo,
Right, right.
not the marketing.
No, the marketing, right? The marketing, their marketing units here are organized at different different product lines, right? So you have people who are supposed to be to negotiate with different business division in headquarters, depending on who is it. So you have in CME, they are people responsible for different line of product, okay? And these people will basically, if you're responsible for TV product in Europe, you talk with TV guys in Tokyo. That's the design. Okay, when there are issues across different lines of business, okay, then probably the CEO or COO would have to step in. Okay, but when it's about just the selection of proper TV model, for example, the CME can handle those.
Which is it was so different from the chart, because in the chart it looks as if here
Which one?
that president and COO is the one who would talk to Tokyo.
They can delegate this negotiation to what? So overall, they still take the overall responsibility, right? It depends on how often you want to interfere. If you guys can handle the situation, you don't have to intervene. So any further reflection? Does this new plan make sense to you? By design. Yes,
I
please.
guess, as you mentioned, the power seems to have concentrated too much in one function.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which function?
the CME.
The CME.
And there's a loss of the local, I guess, touch point with the local countries and markets.
Okay, so if we look at this table, okay, it becomes clear to us that under the new structure, the center of powers locates here, right? Because they are controlling most of the vital activities. Production, it does not matter. Product development does not matter because they are still under the direct control of the Japanese headquarters. So as far as the European operations are concerned, the marketing and sales are the key functions. Okay, and marketing they concentrate for based on the way they distribute the decision making right. The marketing units become the most powerful units. Okay, which actually has some implication. If you encounter organization restructuring in the future when you work for a particular company and you look at this, you know that you need to fight for opportunities of working here. That's where the power resides. Okay. Now another thing you also have to think about is this, okay, which also have important implication. Right. Before, if you work in the country subsidiary, you have the opportunity to communicate directly with people in the global headquarters on a regular basis. Okay? Under the new structure, you lose that, which is bad, because as far as the career advancement is concerned, the greater the extent to which you can communicate with people in the top, on the top, the better off, right? So you are stripped of, if you think of this as motivating effect, that is, for example, if you have a young guy working in an Italian subsidiary, he wouldn't want to work under the Italian subsidiary anymore. Okay, he will be less motivated because of this. Yes, please.
I guess from a information flow standpoint, it also slows that down because
Right.
you have an extra layer to go through in order
Right.
to communicate with the headquarters.
Right,
And
right,
the headquarters
exactly.
it becomes less responsive to local
Right.
needs.
Right, right. And their justification is this. Product changes is slowing down, right? And the preferences have been converging. The logistic channel, the distribution channel are consolidated. So the differences across countries are declining. So the need to understand these differences have been declining as well, okay? And because the changes are slowing down and becoming incremental, you don't need to being informed about informed about like the most recent development all the time. Because things do not change that fast and it's not change much. Okay, so this justify the slowdown in terms of communication channel. As you say, what they are doing is that they are putting different layers between the headquarters and basically the front line. So as a result, the information flow will be slow. But at the same time, you don't need that information still as much as before in the old environment. Okay, so that's probably why they do this. Okay, so that's the plan. Now let's look at what happened as a result. So implementation issue, as mentioned before, right? What are these country managers have to do? So a country manager's job might be reduced to just organizing Christmas party, demoralizing the people in the markets. They don't. The picture from each country gets blurred, particularly to the Tokyo Business Group. Right? Because you can imagine, right? They used to be in direct interaction with you, now they lost touch with you, so you don't know who you are, which is bad. Okay? The consumer market in Europe, okay, they are supposed to be able to integrate across the operation across Europe, provided that they know how, right? But the problem is that they have very limited local know-how to assist country operation, right? They are supposed to integrate operation in UK and German, but they don't. It's not like they know both countries very well, okay? And because of that, they have low credibilities in negotiation with Japan, right? If you don't know what you represent, how can you be credible in the eyes of the representative in Japan? Okay, now, this is an interesting development. The first vice president of CME, who used to be a country manager, actually resigned after just 18 months. Now, if you think about that, that's a salient event. As mentioned, look at this. And that, you know that CME is the most powerful position, right? So you know that if you do your job, being appointed to the head of CME is going to be very good for your future career, okay? But this guy actually resigned. Actually, it's a lady, I think. Okay? Now, for regional sale, there is an issue about confusing responsibility because overlapping with CME. When it comes to marketing and sales, sometimes it's difficult to say that it's falling into the marketing category, it's falling into the sales category, right? And limited scale of cross-border trade at the current moment, okay? So if you have, for example, many multinational clients, you have a large volume of sales through these multinational channels, then integrating sales activity across country will make sense. But what really happens is that there are not so many cross-border kind of sales-related activities, okay? So they don't actually know what they are supposed to do, okay? Okay. Any reflection about this? Is this because, what are the causes of this problem? Is that because the plan is unrealistic, or it is because the way they implement these things? How did this problem emerge? Yes?
I think their organization happened relatively quickly.
Okay.
And that's what was said. And so they said, like, there's not enough information about why the organization change was disseminated down to like important people, so people are confused about why this is happening. Okay. Also, as you mentioned, there's not enough talented managers that are able to handle the like different kind of cross-cultural communication things that were required in consumer marketing Europe. Right. So I think that it was a little rushed. Okay. And because of that, not very, or rather the case says it's not very, it wasn't handled very properly.
Okay. So we have to keep in mind that in the old structure, the most powerful guys are here. Right? For your reorganization to be successful, you must get their support. Right? But the way they did it, they pushed it very quickly, and the communication have been limited. They inform them about the change by some kind of written document. You should talk to them, right? And get their understanding, and try to promise them a career, okay, after organizational change. It's not just political consideration, but you have to remember, under the old structure, your key human resources reside here, right? You don't just destroy them. You have to take full advantage. These are your best people, right? Okay, so that's probably there. So at least two things: the communication is problematic. You also do it too quickly, such that you do not have sufficient time to develop your key human resources to such extent that they can handle the need required in the new organizational structure, right? For this to work, you need people who are familiar with marketing activity across the globe. So before this is going to work, you probably have to rotate some of these country managers in different places, so that after like 3 years, they will become experienced enough to take this position. Then you implement this organizational structure and then put them in charge. Okay, so that's probably the idea. Okay, so it's might make sense, but the pace you implement that and considering where you are from, this is not very feasible. Okay, now, so because, the first vice president of CME resigned in just 18 months, so they need to find a new guy. Okay, and this appeared to be the best candidate they could find. Okay, this is obviously the Japanese. Okay, who joined the companies back in the 70s and have been working across different countries. You could just look at this: Dutch and Italy and Spain and Portugal and eventually back to the UK. Okay, and has some experience in US as well. Now, SONY US is all operated under a centralized model. So you also have knowledge about how this works. Okay, another important thing is that while he was in Dutch, he was an assistant to the current CEO of SONY Europe. Okay, so remember, so we have this structure, right? So this candidate used to work together with the chairman and CEO. Okay, and COO is a relatively new guy who was recruited to implement this kind of organizational changes. Okay, so the question is, from the position of this guy, are you going to appoint this candidate to the position of leading CME or not? Okay, so if you just look at this looks like a very good profile, right? Highly qualified with knowledge across the countries. The only problem is that this guy is opposed of the new organization structure. He's an outspoken opposition to the reorganization, advocate for country managers' autonomy. Okay, are you going to appoint this guy? No. Yes? No. Any suggestion? Yes, please. No.
No, you should not do that.
Okay.
He's qualified that if he's against the structure that you're aiming to change,
Okay.
and he is so independent, then
Okay.
I mean,
Alright.
it's counterintuitive.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe he's so opposed to it because he is the president of a large market, so he had all the autonomy. But if you tell him he's going to be head of CME, maybe that's a different story.
Okay. Right, so why I'm against the plan, but guess what? I appoint you to the central position where you're going to be even more powerful under my new structure as opposed to the old structure. Maybe that will change your mind. I don't know. Okay, so actually he was appointed to the position of vice president of CME, the most powerful position under the new structure. So when the COO, so this is a quote from him. So when Ron asked me if I would take on the CME, I took it for granted that you knew my position on the new organization structure, which is I don't like it. And that I will do things my own way. And I can do that because of this. Okay, and because I'm a Japanese working in a Japanese organization, that's make a lot of difference. You're a foreigner, so chances are will be more powerful. Okay, as soon as he took over the CME, so he immediately reallocated the decision-making right. So under the new, so he established a new principle. So key decision on marketing would be made as close to local market as possible, right? CME's contribution to marketing was seen in only selected areas. So basically, I return the decision-making right to country managers, where a CME will play a supporting role. If you think it will be beneficial to you that I intervene, then I will intervene. Otherwise, you just do your own business. Okay, now, so here, of course, you have to explain his rationale. So the first is motivation. So long-standing manager didn't know where they fitted in any longer. I was concerned about the motivation and productivity of people. Right? These were the most important human resources you have in your organization for like over 20 years. Okay? All of a sudden, you implemented an organization structure that will undermine them. Right? This is going to be too much. Right? Just for the sake of keeping them in your organization and keeping them motivated, I probably have to do. They need to return the decision-making power to them so that they will see themselves as relevant, even under new structure. Another thing thinking about is that Europe is still fragmented markets, ideal that were elsewhere, like the US, which I used to work before, okay, are not practical here. Therefore, CNE has a place only if adds value beyond what country cannot do, beyond what country can do themselves. So the country can handle the business. There's no reason that you tell them that I'm going to take the power back. Okay, so my intervention again will be selective. Okay, so basically what he tried to say is that these developments are happening. That's right. Okay, but as to the current stage, the current situation is not sufficient to justify a highly centralized model that will undermine our key personnel. So that's why he's kind of moving back to the older model. Okay, so that's what happened as a result. Okay, so as you probably can imagine, so after the new CME vice president did all this, the COO who designed the new organizational chart resigned from SONY, but it's not that bad. He actually became the CEO of Dutch Telekom, the largest company in Germany. Okay? And over time, this new vice president of CME vision changed, largely due to the soon to arrive European single currency, the euros, introduced. That is going to change the game. Okay? So now he decided that he increasingly accepts the idea of adopting a centralized structure. Okay? After he recognized the need for a more centralized administration, he was promoted to the position about a year after the original COO resigned. Okay, so he was promoted, from UK to CME and then to the president COO position. Okay. But then, less than a year after this Japanese guy promotion, he went back to the US to take over of the COO of one of Sony's company. Okay? The interesting part is here. A senior executive from Japan succeeded him. Okay? So in the, So any reflections? What does it mean? Yes.
I'm not sure, but Mr. Tagaki's vision of CME was, I think, agreed with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So he did the things his own way, and then the senior executive which replaced him, I think he has not the same vision, obviously, as the previous one,
Right.
because I think he would support the organization Tokyo wanted to do in Europe.
Right.
So I think that was a big difference between between the two organizations. I mean, before and after the departure
Okay.
of Mr. Tagaki.
Okay. Any further comments? What do we see in this case, in this development?
Actually, I have a question. So when Mr. Takagi took over the CME position and he decided to give the decision-making back to the countries,
Right.
did that change the organizational structure? And then
No. The structure is maintained. What is changed is the allocation of decision-making rights.
So he
Right.
just gave-
Right. So in the so this stayed the same, but this has been changed. So more decisions-making power was shipped back to the country managers.
And then so when his vision changed back afterwards,
Right.
then he just took it.
Right. So no, when his vision began to change, he began to the SONY Europe began to take some of the decision-making power back to the CME again. Okay, and after so it's more like they start with a very decentralized model in the very beginning, and they push all of a sudden they push for a high degree of centralization in terms of us reflecting on organizational chart as well as the allocation of decision-making rights. Okay, it was not successful. The first vice president or the first leader they appointed to the CA could not get the job done. Right? He could not justify the value of CME. Okay, and given the old structure, the country manager are very powerful, right? So he just cannot handle the tension. Okay, so he left, like she left. Okay, and then you recruit somebody who has been perceived as a competent managers or across the country because he has been here and there, right? And he is an insider, so he's supposed to have power. He has connection with both the chairman and CEO of Europe as well as the Japan, his headquarters because of his country of origin, right? So you appoint the people, a person with sufficient credibilities in the eyes of country managers as well as in the CEO as well as the Japanese headquarters to take over the position. Okay, so what he did afterwards was to to take care of the concern of country managers. They don't see themselves relevant anymore, so you have to allocate the power back to them. Okay, and also he was thinking that it's not time for us to push for a high degree of centralization. Okay, but the environment increasingly changed. Okay, and during this period, he also tried to communicate with this country manager. Look, the situation is different nowadays, so we need to make adjustment. Maybe not at a very radical pace as before, but in a more incremental pace. So over time, we still have to take some of your decision-making powers back. Okay. Also, we prepare you to take the responsibility here. Right? There are quite a number of positions that will require people with deep country knowledge. So if these organizational units are no longer important on the organization, in the new organizational structure, we should move people or most talented people to the organizational unit that matter. Right? So you have to still, on the organizational chart, over time you still have to. So you move the power back here, but then you have to take it here again. At the same time, you move people along with it, very important people. Right? So at the time of his departure, the centralization has increased in comparison to the old structure. Okay? And then they put the Japanese from Japanese headquarters to take over this position. Yes, please.
I feel by assigning Japanese manager, the organization itself went back to the localization much more because Japanese manager cover a lot, and each European manager cover just the country
Okay.
in Europe. So it's more easy to connect with Japanese headquarters with Japanese manager, but
Right.
just European people just manage their own country or.
Okay. So over time, when this new plan is fully implemented, the country subsidiary will play very limited supporting and administration roles. And those activities may be carried out by people of different nationalities. Okay, the key activities are carried out here, and perhaps here when the next country market further consolidate. Okay, and then they put the Japanese to control or to manage the crucial activities in Europe. Okay, so that's what they do. So as you can imagine, it's going to facilitate the further global integration. Any further reflections? Yes, please.
I mean, if this is what it took in order to make it successful, then I think the entire reorganization was detrimental.
Okay.
They should have waited until, they really should have waited. It didn't seem like they properly thought this out. Maybe they just started panicking because their margins started slipping. I think it was literally like the last 3 years or the first year that their growth was not more, I actually don't remember the statistics, but it was like the first year that their growth was not as what they predicted.
Right.
That they decided to restructure.
Right.
So they should have waited a little bit longer or come up with a better idea of how to address their shrinking margins.
Right.
This was like tumultuous, and they succeeded only after putting out so many different fires and in fact reverting the structure back to what it was previously, essentially. Only until, as you said, the euro was introduced was this something necessary that they could do. So I think it was a mistake.
Okay, so probably they push it too quickly and too hard.
Yeah.
Probably have to think about the transition stage, which brought us back to the case that we looked at before, right? Instead of going all the way from a structured organization to like a function, to a business division kind of organizational structure, they actually go through different stages to prepare people, right? Here, they don't have this kind of transition, right? So, but there's another dilemma that organizations have to deal with. It is very difficult to push for major changes like this without significant or substantial crisis out there, right? But at the same time, organizational changes consume a lot of resources, and efficiency and effectiveness of the organization tend to drop during the reorganization phases. So what happens is that you find it very difficult to push for major changes when the threat is not so substantial. But when the threat becomes substantial enough such that, for example, you keep losing money for a substantial period of time, you lack the required resources to initiate this kind, to implement or to complete this kind of organizational resources. Any further comments? Okay, so we now take a 15 minutes break and we'll continue at 6 p.m.